Welcome back to another episode of Mind, Body, Spirit. I'm Dr. Kayte, and today's guest is a leader in the technology space. He's the founder and CEO of a company which is now publicly traded called Lightspeed. He's also the author of the book that we're here to talk about today, The Age of Union. Please welcome to the show, Mr. Dax Dasilva.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, absolutely. Did I say your name correctly?
Of course, yes.
Want to make sure. Thank you so much for being here, firstly. I'm sure you're very busy.
Pleasure. Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about this book. Let's start with that.
Yeah, so, you know, I've 14 years of building this tech company, Lightspeed. We recently went public. I also have this cultural center, Neverpart. There's all these different elements where I get to interact with change makers because Lightspeed, we build commerce tools for retail and restaurant, but the independent business owners. You know, so they're making change in their neighborhoods. We're working with those kinds of entrepreneurs. And then at the Cultural Center, we're working with artists that are trying to, you know, but sort of artists that are working with social messaging. So all of these people are change makers, whether it's in their communities or their neighborhoods or you know, on a global platform they're trying to build. And so over the years, I've thought, you know, shouldn't there be a toolkit for igniting the change maker? And so Age of Union gives 4 pillars for how the budding change maker can think about holistically all of the things that are going to make them a successful change maker.
Right, and also maybe the social responsibility, which you touched on a lot.
Yeah.
Did you want to speak a little bit about using social media as a positive platform rather than talking about the negatives, which we could talk about a lot of the negatives.
Sure, yeah. I mean, there's so many things that can be said about things like social media or capitalism. These are all our tools. They're our inventions. And so how we decide to use those tools that are human creations is that's our choice. You know, it can be used it can be used for a range of things. And I think what's interesting is we all sense that there's so much positive potential with social media. It's in its early stages. I think that it's vulnerable to our own sort of instincts and our own. The way that the systems are designed are to play on our own need for validation a little bit, and so how these platforms can be used for change, I think that potential is. You're seeing it. You're seeing people able to have these conversations, be globally conscious because of social media. But of course, all of the negatives are also discussed as well. Everything has positives and negatives.
Right. So to rephrase what I think you just said, it's like we're, you know, the selfie culture and we're turning the camera on ourselves, which in a way is, people are asking for it. It's not like there was at one point a trend of people who were just very narcissistic, and we used to call that out. But now it seems like everyone's gone that way, and it's expected almost that you need to provide this for your viewers, for your followers, right?
Right. I think it's a little bit of a reflection of where we are as a society, right?
Okay.
So we think about we have so much individual, and I speak about this in Age of Union in the very first section in the leadership pillar. There's 4 pillars. There's leadership, culture, spirituality, and nature. 4 things I think that we have to think about together as like a sort of a spiritual base or as a base for creating action, right? And so it's that individual power that we have in 2019 or in this particular age it's so rooted right now in the self,
right?
But the future of it is to think about the greater, right? That individual power can be focused for the greater good,
right?
And that's the shift that I think has to happen. Right now, it's a lot about the self, and we don't explore the soul, which is connected to the greater purpose.
And the self, of course, also, right? Or the ability to use like your self-image as a platform for empowerment for the greater good.
Absolutely.
Which I think is the point of what the message, right? Or one of the points.
That's the thing is that your individual power and the self that you build, right? That's a complete self, is actually very powerful. And then when used on social media, that's a platform for you to bring your particular light into the world.
Right. I love that. That makes sense. So if we back up, I would like to kind of figure out how you got here. So you had this community organization, right? That was sort of focused on spirituality and service. Is that right?
Neverpart?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Neverpart was actually I created it in a former Lightspeed office when we moved at our 10-year mark. And it's this great sort of 12,000 square foot warehouse that we turned into an office, and it's got an outdoor pool. It's like a really cool spot, but it's right in the artistic hub of Montreal.
Okay.
It's kind of the Williamsburg of Montreal, but it didn't have a cultural kind of center, And so what I decided to do was create a space where artists could not just, it's not a gallery for a gallery's sake, it's to create conversations.
Okay.
So it had this intention of connecting people through something that is very neutral. Like culture is something anybody can connect to, whether it's music or art or film or dance. Like everybody can learn about each other's culture, everybody can learn about one another, build bridges of understanding through culture. So that was kind of an experiment. And I learned a lot from that experience. Wrote a manifesto at the beginning of the process of that center starting in 2015. And the book is really after 3 or 4 years of learning from that center, as well as 14 years of learning from Lightspeed, running this tech company, which we bootstrapped, then got investors, now went public. All of those learnings are sort of like I tried to capture so that the next generation of leaders and change makers have something that's not just business tips,
right,
but also something that's a bit more holistic for themselves.
Right, and it speaks to the bigger things that we are lacking and wanting more of. And you were talking about that it was either in the book I read it or in an article I was reading, or no, it was in your TED Talk. You were talking about spirituality, the modern spiritual conversation, which you mentioned is sort of difficult to talk about.
Well, I think that we don't have modern ways to talk about spirituality, and when I speak to entrepreneurs or young artists that are trying to create something, they're often doing this with no foundation spiritually. They haven't built that base, and because many people have moved away from religion or traditions, or it's very disconnected from anything, right? And so they're searching for a way to feed this other part of themselves that's undernourished, right? So we've got our body, and we keep that healthy because it's our instrument. But there's also this element called the soul. But there's where do we really hear about this in a modern way, and how do we look at this in a way that doesn't sound too new agey and hokey? And so that was the attempt, is to try to create a universal way to talk about it, so that it actually can be something that enriches people as they're building, because you need that foundation.
Right.
I wouldn't have been able to get through all of the journey of Lightspeed and Neverpart without having that sort of as a base.
Tell me, how did you integrate your own spirituality, your own soul journey into your company and into your day? I mean, is that a hard question? That's a tough.
Well, so I think there is this idea in the book of unity and union, but the reality of the world is that there's so much diversity, right? And I think that the walk the spiritual walk involves seeing all the immense diversity, whether it's through cultures, whether it's other species, whether it's your circle of empathy grows the more you're connected, and the more you care about the broader and broader picture, right?
Okay.
And so when you're building a company, all of the founding members, including myself, were from the LGBTQ community.
Okay.
And so we started with a very diverse base, and we built the company with the understanding that diversity is something that was going to be a strength of the company, and that we were going to be unified and have unity, but also flower through diversity. So that is sort of a very kind of the big spiritual idea, is that how do you find union when there's so much difference between things? And that in a microcosm, you can see that at Lightspeed, of how we have Lightspeed Amsterdam, Lightspeed London, Lightspeed New York, Lightspeed Montreal, but they're not the same cultures.
Right.
They never will be, but they all add something to the picture. People communicate in different ways. They ideate in different ways. It's enriching. You have to embrace those things,
right,
and uplift and elevate those things, and then find how we work all together on common values.
And along the journey, did you encounter challenges with that goal? I mean, at your base, I'm sure there was a good unity happening, but what about in the world, like as a company or as? Well,
I think that people have very many different ways of communicating and understanding one another, and so whenever you're trying to do a project that's trying to build bridges, I mean, there's always going to be stumbling blocks, and there's always going to be obstacles in that striving for that perfect union,
right.
and But those are learnings. Those are things that build, and that's why I think that it was important for Lightspeed to bootstrap and not take external investment for its first 7 years, so that we could really bake in our identity and solidify our DNA. Because later, as we acquired companies, we did 5 acquisitions in Canada, the US, and in Europe. As we brought more and more people into our culture, we really had a strong sense of identity and self. And so we could invite others that were different and have that be constructive.
Wow, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You weren't dealing with the agendas of those investors in the beginning.
At the beginning, yeah. Later, they took us to another level, you know, and that was the next 7 years. Now we're in the stage where we're a public company. It's a whole new ball game.
Right.
But that 7 years of having investors, there's a lot of external pressures and views from what they would like to see the company do, and actually pushed us to do an international expansion and a lot of amazing things. But I would never trade that for 7 years of bootstrapping. And I always tell entrepreneurs to try to build your company on your own revenue as long as possible. It builds your integrity and your own DNA and value system.
Absolutely, I think that's really good advice. Now, I'm wondering, from the community center, what was the biggest message that you were surprised to learn that you ended up taking into Lightspeed?
Oh, that's a great question. I think it's the biggest lesson. I think is listening.
Okay.
You know, we have invited people from all sorts of cultural communities and gender identities and just such a diversity of groups in. And you think that you're an ally, and you think that that you know something about these communities. But once you really start, because we do an exhibition, but we also do talks and discussions, and it's through that process of listening that you actually really get an insight into another person's world.
Yes.
And I think applying that to business, where people are just a lot about talking and not so much about listening, it's very powerful. You know, we expect, and we're a true leader builds leaders, and we're trying to build leaders all throughout Lightspeed. And the one takeaway that I've gotten from the cultural center is, you know, you're a leader. Listen. You know, it's actually more powerful. People respect you more when you listen, and then then you take what you've got. You've got the buy-in of people because they're heard, and then you can synthesize solutions together.
Right. I love that. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Totally. So now I was reading in somewhere that your family came as immigrants to Canada.
Yeah.
Is that right? And it seems, now that I know more about your background, that there is a recurring theme outside of LGBT in just, did you feel like an outsider growing up? Did you feel like your family had a different culture?
So my parents were born in Uganda. We're originally from it's a complicated story. We're originally from a Portuguese colony in India. So when they came to Canada, they were English-speaking immigrants from a British colony. So I don't know that there was major culture clash. And I was born in Vancouver. I don't know if it's because of the nature of how Canada is, but I didn't experience too many disadvantages or discrimination growing up, but certainly a sense of difference, you know, especially, being a person of color, being a person in the LGBTQ community. You're not like everybody else, but the society is inclusive enough to have allowed me to find my place and allowed me to build something.
Right.
And so, but the work at the Cultural Center has taught me that not everybody is as privileged to have been able to slot in and find that. And so it's I think upon everybody that is a leader to be able to build other people that sort of don't have the same advantages.
Right.
You know?
So you sort of came into this role as a leader, and you do represent these groups that you might not have had the same experience as them, but you can certainly be a voice for them. Right.
And I think that I believe in all of these young leaders as change makers, and so that's sort of why this 3-year journey of trying to put this book together, a year of notes, a year of draft, another year of editing and design, is worth it, because now I have something that I can share in a cohesive way with some of these people that are trying to do really important work.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
So I'd like to talk about the nature section a little bit,
Oh,
because
yeah.
I think that's the wild card a little bit, right?
Yeah.
And maybe understand leadership and then it moves. So do you want to speak a little bit about where that came from?
So yeah, I think the progression is, Kate, leadership, which is like our power as individuals, culture, our collective power, spirituality, our own base, and then at the end is the thing that we're all really concerned about, which is the environment and nature. And
well, not all of us.
Yeah, well, not all of us, but I think all of us hear the headlines.
Right. Yeah. Whether they believe it or not.
Yeah. And I think that younger generations, when I speak, I spoke at a college in Montreal before I left to come here, and they're very concerned and they feel very powerless.
Yeah.
You know, so if you have the first 3 pillars of the book sort of like, you know, part of your ethos, you must also include nature, because nature is our mother.
Yes.
And the last section of the book is 40 acts of union. I didn't want to drop a whole bunch of philosophy on people and not give them things that are actionable to do, that are, you know, representative of thinking about all of these things together.
Yes.
And nature features a lot in all of those things. It's like, you know, exploring plant-based eating, exploring banning plastic as much as you can from your life. Some of them are basic, some of them are bigger, like conserving the wildlands that are left, or restoring some abused land.
Right.
You know, and there's so many things that we can do, and I think it's our responsibility, you know, if we have the resources, and those are things that I think we should all find important. It's not political, it's not left or right, it's our planet, right?
Yeah, and also just like balancing nature time with technology time, right? I mean, from a health standpoint, we know that's very important, just on the cellular level. And
I think people are so fortunate here in, you know, I went on a little hike yesterday. There's so much natural beauty here. I hope people aren't stuck too much on their phones when they're surrounded by so much natural beauty.
Right.
And that's something that can recharge you spiritually. Even if you don't have a particular belief system, nature is the great connector to what is the unity of everything, right?
Yeah, I think that that's such an important message, and I'm really glad that that's your 4th pillar. Where can people find this book if they want to read it?
So it's available for purchase online at ageofunion.com. You could also pick it up through Amazon and the typical booksellers. But if you want to learn more about the book, it's ageofunion.com. And I have links to all the places where the book can be picked up. Okay, we'll get that on the bottom. So before we wrap up, do you have any last advice that you'd like to share with anyone, or something that you've encountered that you think is worth mentioning? Well, one of the things that I have heard from younger people as I talk to them about the book is that this feeling of powerlessness that the world is sort of beyond them changing. There are so many inspiring individuals that have, like Jane Goodall or Paul Watson regarding the oceans, like single individuals have saved species, you know? It's like you can, as a change maker, have so much potential to do, you know, however you can apply your talent. There's always a special, unique way that you can take what you can do and apply it. Everybody can be a change maker, and hopefully hoping to ignite a few with this book. I think that you probably already have, and will ignite a lot more. I'm so happy that you came today. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Kayte. Yes, of course. And thank you everyone for watching. This has been another episode of Mind, Body, Spirit. I'm Dr. Kayte. This is Dax. Have a wonderful day.